Imagine a perfect life, loving wife, 2 kids, a dream home. Then, one phone call shatters it. He thinks those kids are his. Betrayed, James weaves a silent plan, waiting for her grand birthday. One click unveils her secrets, shattering her world. His hypnotic revenge sparks a fire. Truth burns, lies crumble. Will he rebuild from the ashes, or will justice consume him? Dive into a story of deception and redemption. The wind carried a faint chill through the quiet streets of Oak Park, a leafy suburb just west of Chicago's restless pulse. James stood in the driveway of his 2-story colonial home, the kind with white shutters and a porch swing that creaked softly in the evening breeze. He adjusted the collar of his wool coat, his breath visible in the October air, and glanced at his watch. 4:17 p.m. The supplier meeting had been canceled last minute. Some mix-up with the contractor's schedule, and for once, James found himself with an unexpected pocket of time. He wasn't due home for another 2 hours, but the thought of surprising Sarah with her favorite coffee, a caramel macchiato from that overpriced cafe on Madison Street, tugged at him like a quiet instinct. 14 years of marriage had taught him the small gestures that mattered. A coffee she didn't ask for, a hand on her shoulder after a long day, the way her eyes softened when he remembered the little things, like how she hated the taste of decaf or the way she'd hum old jazz tunes while cooking dinner. James wasn't perfect, he'd admit that in a heartbeat, but he tried. He always tried. His construction company, built from late nights and calloused hands, had given them this house, the kids' private school, the annual trips to Florida's Gulf Coast. But it was the quiet moments, the ones no one saw, that he cherished most. Emma's giggle when he tossed her in the air. Liam's shy grin when James helped him with math homework. Sarah's laugh, bright and unguarded, like it could stop time. He slid into his SUV, the engine humming to life, and drove toward the city. Chicago's skyline loomed in the distance, a jagged silhouette against the graying sky. Traffic on I-290 was mercifully light, and James let his mind wander as he navigated the familiar route. He thought about the kids. Emma, 10, with her mother's curls and a stubborn streak that made him laugh. Liam, 7, quieter, always sketching superheroes in his notebook. He thought about Sarah, how she'd been lately. Distracted, maybe, but wasn't everyone? Work was relentless, the kids were a handful, and life had a way of pulling you in different directions. Still, he felt a pang of guilt. Had he been too absent? Too focused on the next project, the next deadline? He shook it off. Tonight, he'd make it right. Just a coffee, a smile, a moment to remind her they were still in this together. The cafe was tucked between a bookstore and a yoga studio, its windows glowing with warm light. James ordered the macchiato, double-checking the barista got the syrup ratio right. Sarah was particular about that. He paid, tipped generously, and stepped back into the crisp air, the paper cup warm in his hand. The drive home was quicker, the city fading into the softer edges of Oak Park. He pulled into the driveway, the house standing silent under the weight of early dusk. No lights in the windows, no sound of Emma practicing her piano or Liam shouting about his latest video game. The quiet felt heavy, not peaceful but expectant, like the air was holding its breath. James stepped out, locking the car with a soft beep. He moved toward the front door, the coffee still steaming in his grip. The porch light flickered, a bulb he'd been meaning to replace. He turned the key, easing the door open, and paused. A faint sound drifted from the living room. Sarah's voice, low and laced with laughter. He smiled instinctively. She must be on the phone, maybe catching up with her sister or one of her old college friends. He pictured her curled on the couch, her dark hair spilling over her shoulders, that easy grin she wore when she thought no one was watching. He wanted to keep that image, to hold it like a photograph. So he moved quietly, not wanting to interrupt, not wanting to ruin the surprise. The hardwood floor creaked under his boots, but the sound was swallowed by the hum of the furnace. He set his keys on the entry table, careful not to let them jingle, and edged toward the living room. The coffee cup felt heavier now, its heat seeping through his palm. Sarah's voice grew clearer, each word slicing through the stillness like a blade. "He actually thinks those kids are his," she said, her tone sharp with amusement. "Can you imagine? 14 years, and he still has no idea." James froze, his breath caught, a jagged thing trapped in his chest. The world tilted, the walls of the house blurring at the edges. He stood just outside the living room, hidden by the shadow of the hallway, his body rooted to the floor. Sarah's laugh came again, lighter this time, like she was sharing a private joke. "David, and I say it all the time. He's the perfect fool." The name David hit like a punch. David, the charming contractor James had pulled out of a failed startup a decade ago. David, who'd crashed in their guest room after a bad breakup, who'd eaten at their table, who'd called James brother with that easy grin. James's mind raced, grasping for a lifeline, a reason this wasn't what it sounded like. But Sarah kept talking, oblivious to how close he was, to how the ground was crumbling beneath him. "No, I don't feel bad," she said. "He was always busy with that company. He missed the signs. Besides, the kids look enough like him to pass. And David, he's always been the one. Always." The coffee cup slipped from James's hand. It hit the floor with a dull thud, the lid popping off, caramel-scented liquid pooling across the hardwood. The sound wasn't loud enough to reach her, but it was enough to mark the moment something inside him shattered. His wrist burned where the coffee had splashed, but he didn't feel it. His heart didn't race. It sank, heavy and cold, like a stone dropped into a frozen lake. He stood there, one hand braced against the wall, listening as the woman he'd built his life around laughed at him like he was a punchline. He wanted to storm in, to demand answers, to scream until the walls shook. But his feet wouldn't move. His voice wouldn't come. Instead, he did something harder. He stayed still. He listened. Every word she spoke carved itself into his memory, each syllable a wound he'd carry. "James is so predictable," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "He'll keep working, keep providing, and by the time he figures it out, I'll have everything I need to walk away." The call ended with a soft click. James heard her sigh, then the rustle of her moving off the couch. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. He backed away, silent, deliberate, like a man retreating from a crime scene. He grabbed a rag from the kitchen, wiped the coffee spill, and mopped up the evidence of his presence. His hands trembled, but his movements were precise. He couldn't let her know he'd been here. Not yet. When he stepped into the kitchen, the rag still in his hand, Sarah appeared in the doorway. She looked startled for a fraction of a second, then her face softened into that familiar smile, the one that used to make him feel like the luckiest man alive. "Hey, you're early," she said, her voice bright, like nothing in the world was wrong. She crossed the room, planting a kiss on his cheek. "Everything okay?" James nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah," he managed, forcing a smile. "Meeting got canceled. Thought I'd come home." He held up the empty rag, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Brought your coffee, but I dropped it in the hallway like an idiot." She laughed, a sound that now felt like glass under his skin. "Oh, you're hopeless," she teased, nudging his arm. "I'll survive without it." She tilted her head, studying him. "You sure you're okay? You look tired." "I'm fine," he said, the lie slipping out as easily as her own. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time he saw the stranger behind her eyes. The woman he'd married, the one he'd vowed to love through every storm, was gone. In her place was someone who'd turned his life into a game, and he'd been playing it blind. "Where are the kids?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. "With my mom," she said, turning to grab a glass from the cabinet. "They'll be back for dinner. You want to order pizza tonight?" "Sure," he said, his voice a hollow echo. He watched her move, the way she hummed softly, the way she filled her glass with water like this was just another Tuesday. He laughed, a short, forced sound that matched her ease. Not because it was funny, but because he knew something she didn't. The game had changed. He wasn't her fool anymore. He was her shadow now, watching, waiting, and learning the rules she thought she'd written. That night, James sat in his home office, The door closed, the house silent except for the distant hum of the dishwasher. He stared at the family photos on his desk. Emma and Liam at the beach, Sarah's head resting on his shoulder, all of them smiling under a Florida sunset. The colors looked wrong now, the smile staged. He picked up a frame, his thumb tracing the edge, and felt the weight of 14 years settle in his chest. Father, husband, provider, those words had defined him. Now they felt like lies he'd told himself. He opened his laptop, the screen's glow harsh against the dim room. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, then typed, "Private DNA testing Chicago." The search results spilled across the screen, each link a step toward a truth he wasn't sure he could face. He clicked one, a discreet service that promised results in a week. He called the number, his voice low, arranging for a kit to be mailed under a friend's name. Then he dialed another number, one he hadn't used in years, a private investigator he'd hired during a business merger. "I need you to follow someone," James said, his voice steady now. "My wife. Everything she does, everywhere she goes. No one can know." The investigator agreed, no questions asked. James hung up and leaned back in his chair, the darkness of the room pressing against him. He thought about Emma and Liam, asleep in their beds down the hall. He thought about Sarah, her laugh still echoing in his mind. He thought about David, the man who'd called him brother while stealing his life. The rage was there, hot and sharp, but James didn't let it take over. He closed his eyes and made a promise to himself. This wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of theirs. If the story's pulling you in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next tale. Your support keeps these stories alive, and we're grateful for every one of you. The clock on James's desk ticked past midnight, its rhythm a quiet metronome in the stillness of his home office. The house slept, Emma and Liam tucked in their beds, Sarah's soft breathing audible through the walls. But James was wide awake, his eyes fixed on the laptop screen. The email from the DNA testing service sat unopened in his inbox, its subject line stark, "Results available." His finger hovered over the mouse, the cursor a blinking accusation. He'd known this moment was coming, had prepared for it in the days since he'd overheard Sarah's call. But now that it was here, the weight of it pressed against his chest like a vice. He clicked. The PDF loaded slowly, each percentage point a heartbeat. Probability of paternity, 0%. The words stared back at him, clinical and unyielding. Emma, his little girl who'd clung to his hand at her first piano recital. Liam, who'd drawn a picture of James as a superhero last Father's Day. Not his, not by blood, not by any strand of DNA. The room blurred, the edges of his vision dissolving into a haze. He closed the laptop, his hands cold, and leaned back in his chair. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint creak of the house settling. He wasn't a father. Not in the way he'd believed. The truth didn't just hurt. It erased him. James stood, his legs unsteady, and crossed to the window. The streetlights of Oak Park cast long shadows across the lawn, their glow muted by the October fog. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, his breath fogging the pain. He thought about the kids, their faces so familiar he could trace every freckle from memory. They still called him Dad. They still ran to him when the world felt too big. Biology didn't change that, did it? But the question lingered, sharp and unrelenting. How long had Sarah known? How long had she looked into his eyes, kissed his cheek, and lied? He turned back to the desk, his gaze falling on a photo frame. Sarah, Emma, Liam, and him at Navy Pier, the Ferris wheel glowing behind them. David had been there that day, snapping the picture, his laugh echoing as he teased James about his fear of heights. David, who'd wormed his way into their lives a decade ago, a broke contractor with a quick smile and a knack for making everyone like him. James had given him a job, a place to stay, a second chance after he'd stolen from a project fund and begged for forgiveness. Sarah had pleaded his case back then, her voice soft but firm. "He's family now," she'd said. Family. The word tasted like ash now. James sat down, opened a new tab, and dialed the private investigator's number. "It's me," he said when the man answered, his voice low but steady. "I need everything you've got on her. Where she goes, who she sees, what she's hiding. And I need it fast." The investigator, a gruff ex-cop named Ray, didn't ask for details. "Give me a week," he said. "You'll have what you need." James hung up and stared at the ceiling. The rage was there, coiled like a snake, but he didn't let it strike. Not yet. Rage was loud, messy. He needed something colder, sharper. He needed a plan. The next morning, James woke before dawn. The house was still dark, the air heavy with the scent of last night's pizza. He moved quietly, slipping into Emma's room first. Her hairbrush lay on the dresser, a tangle of brown curls caught in its bristles. He plucked a few strands, sealing them in a plastic bag as the DNA service had instructed. Liam's room was next, his brush tucked under a pile of comic books. James worked with precision, his hands steady despite the ache in his chest. He didn't look at their sleeping faces. He couldn't. Not now. He mailed the samples on his way to work, dropping the package at a post office in downtown Chicago. The city buzzed around him. Honking cabs, pedestrians rushing through crosswalks, the L train rattling overhead. But James felt detached, like he was watching it all through a stranger's eyes. His office, a corner suite in a glass building near the Loop, was no refuge. The spreadsheets on his desk, the contracts waiting for his signature, felt meaningless. He stared out the window, the Chicago River glittering below, and saw David's name on a supplier agreement. A memory flashed. David, years ago, crashing on their couch, thanking James for saving his life. Sarah had been there, pouring wine, her smile too warm, too lingering. How had he missed it? Ray's first report arrived 3 days later, delivered to a burner phone James had bought at a gas station. The email was concise, professional, but each line hit like a bullet. Sarah had made 3 trips to an apartment building in the Loop, a sleek high-rise with a doorman and floor-to-ceiling windows. She stayed 2 hours each time, always mid-afternoon when James was at work. The resident listed for the unit, David Marshall. Photos were attached. Sarah in yoga pants, carrying a grocery bag, her hair pulled back. Sarah leaving at dusk, wearing one of James's old Cubs hoodies. Sarah kissing David in the parking garage, her hands on his face, no hesitation, no shame. James zoomed in on the photo, his thumb tracing the screen. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was surgical, layered, intentional. He opened another attachment, a bank statement Ray had pulled through a contact. Small, consistent transfers from a joint account to a shell company registered under a fake name. The signatures on the approval forms? Sarah's, signed as James's proxy during a business trip last year. They weren't just cheating. They were stealing, siphoning his life's work while laughing behind his back. He closed the phone and drove to his lawyer's office, a discreet firm in Evanston. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Ellen, listened as James laid out the situation. Not the affair, not yet, but the need to protect his assets. "I want everything moved," he said. "The house, the Florida condo, the investments. All of it under my mother's name, predated to look like it was planned years ago." Ellen raised an eyebrow but nodded. "It's doable," she said. "But it'll take time and absolute secrecy." James agreed, signing the first set of papers that afternoon. The Oak Park house, the one he'd carried Sarah over the threshold of 14 years ago, was no longer theirs. It was his mother's now, a fortress Sarah couldn't touch. Back home, James played the part. He smiled more, kissed Sarah's forehead, brought home roses from a florist near his office. "You're being so sweet lately," she said one night, her eyes sparkling as she arranged the flowers in a vase. "What's gotten into you?" He shrugged, his voice light. "Just remembering how lucky I am." She laughed, oblivious, and he watched her, memorizing every glance, every lie. He booked a dinner for 2 at a rooftop restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan, the kind of place Sarah loved to post about online. She gushed to her friends over the phone, her voice carrying through the house. "James is stepping up," she said. "It's like he's finally paying attention." But James was paying attention to everything. The way she checked her phone when she thought he wasn't looking. The way she giggled at texts that came late at night. The way she mentioned David in passing, too casually, like she was testing the waters. "He's been so helpful with the business," she said over dinner, twirling pasta on her fork. "Maybe you should let him take on more." James nodded, his smile tight. "Maybe," he said, filing the comment away. Every word, every move was evidence now. The DNA results had been the first blow, but the reports from Ray were the fuel. Each one painted a clearer picture of Sarah's double life. She'd opened a hidden credit card, used it for hotel stays and cash withdrawals. She'd visited a divorce lawyer in the Loop, spending an hour in a glass-walled office. She wasn't just cheating. She was planning her exit, building a strategy to take half of everything James had built. But she didn't know he was rewriting the rules. Every night, he lay beside her, listening to her breathe, wondering how many lies she'd whispered in her sleep, wondering how he'd missed the signs, or if he'd chosen not to see them. One evening, Emma came to him, her face serious. "Dad, can I ask you something?" she said, sitting on the edge of his office chair. James nodded, his heart tightening. "If you and Mom ever split up, would we live with Uncle David?" The question hit like a freight train. He kept his voice calm. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" She shrugged, her eyes on the floor. "I heard Mom talking. She said it might happen. I don't want to live with him. He's weird." James pulled her into a hug, hiding the storm inside him. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "You're with me." But the words echoed in his mind. Even the kids were pawns in her plan. That night, James stood in the garage, the door closed, the air thick with the smell of oil and dust. He gripped the edge of a workbench, his knuckles white. The rage wasn't just a snake anymore. It was a fire, burning through every memory, every promise. Sarah's voice played on a loop in his head. "He's the perfect fool." But he wasn't. Not anymore. He opened the burner phone and texted Ray, "I need more. Audio, video, anything you can get." Ray replied within minutes. "On it. You'll have it before her birthday." Sarah's birthday. She'd been planning it for weeks. An intimate gathering at a chic restaurant in the Loop. Close friends, her boss, her cousin Mia, and, of course, David. James had nudged her toward inviting the right people, the ones who'd see her as the perfect wife, the perfect mother. He wanted witnesses for what was coming. He met with a tech consultant, a former colleague who owed him a favor, and arranged a private stream for the party. A timed sequence that would project photos, audio, and documents with a single click. He tested it in his office, watching the evidence play out on a blank wall. Each image, each word was a weapon. He didn't flinch. James looked in the mirror that night, his reflection a stranger. The man who'd loved Sarah was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder. He smiled, not with joy but with purpose. The game wasn't hers anymore. It was his, and he was playing to win. If the story's gripping you as much as it's gripping us, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with your city or how this twist made you feel. Your support fuels these tales, and we might just shout you out in our next one. The Chicago skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling, a rooftop restaurant perched atop a sleek tower in the Loop. The city's lights danced across the dark waters of Lake Michigan, a mesmerizing backdrop to the evening's carefully orchestrated chaos. Inside, the air buzzed with the clink of wine glasses, the murmur of laughter, and the soft hum of a jazz quartet in the corner. James stood near the entrance, his suit crisp, his smile practiced, greeting guests as they arrived for Sarah's birthday. He shook hands, clapped backs, and nodded at compliments about the venue. "Perfect choice, James," Sarah's boss said, raising a glass. "You've outdone yourself." James smiled, his eyes flicking to the small remote in his pocket. "Just wait," he said softly. "The best is yet to come." Sarah was radiant, a vision in a silver dress that caught the light with every turn. Her dark curls cascaded over her shoulders, and her laugh carried across the room, bright and effortless. She moved through the crowd like a queen, accepting hugs, posing for photos, her confidence unshakable. James watched her, his heart a tangle of grief and resolve. She was beautiful, undeniable, The woman he'd once believed was his forever. But tonight, that illusion would end. He'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, checking the projector hidden behind a decorative screen, testing the text sequence with his consultant, rehearsing his words in front of the mirror. Every detail was perfect. Every move was his. The guest list was deliberate, a curated audience for the fall. Sarah's boss, a no-nonsense marketing exec named Carla. Her cousin Mia, who'd always been the family's moral compass. 2 college friends, now married with kids of their own. And David, of course, strolling in with that familiar grin. His button-down shirt open at the collar, his charm dialed to maximum. "Brother," David said, pulling James into a hug. "Been too long." James clapped him on the back, his grip just tight enough to feel the tension in David's shoulders. "Way too long," he replied, handing David a beer. "Let's make tonight count." David laughed, oblivious, and joined Sarah at the center of the room. Their ease of performance James now saw through. James moved through his tasks like a ghost. He adjusted place cards, signaled the caterers, checked the projector cable tucked behind a potted plant. Sarah caught his eye from across the room and blew him a kiss, her smile so genuine it almost broke him. He raised his glass in return, his face a mask. 14 years of memories flashed through his mind. Their first date at a dive bar in Wicker Park, the rainy morning they got married, the night Emma was born, Sarah's hand squeezing his in the delivery room. He pushed them away. Those moments belonged to a man who didn't exist anymore. By 7 p.m., the room was full, the energy high. The quartet played a slow rendition of "Fly Me to the Moon," and Sarah held court, her laughter drawing eyes. James stood near the bar, sipping a bourbon, his pulse steady despite the storm inside. He caught Mia's gaze, her warm nod a reminder of why he'd invited her. She'd see the truth tonight, and she'd carry it with her. Carla raised her glass, clinking it with a spoon. "Speech! Speech!" she called, her voice cutting through the chatter. The crowd joined in, clapping, turning to James. Sarah laughed, pointing at him, her eyes bright with joy. "Come on, James," she said, her voice teasing. "Tell everyone how much you love me." James stepped forward, the remote in his pocket a quiet weight. He took a deep breath, his smile calm, measured. The room quieted, all eyes on him. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice clear, carrying over the soft music. "It means the world to see so many of you here, people who've been part of our lives for years. 14 years of marriage is a journey, full of joy, full of lessons, and full of truths we sometimes ignore until we can't." A few guests chuckled nervously, sensing the shift in his tone. Sarah's smile twitched, just for a moment, but she held it, her eyes locked on his. He continued, his voice steady, each word a step toward the edge. "This year, I learned something that changed me, something painful but also freeing. And instead of telling you, I thought I'd show you." He reached into his pocket, his thumb finding the remote. The lights dimmed, the projector hummed to life, and the screen behind him glowed. The first image appeared, a photo of Sarah and David in a parking garage, their lips locked, her hands on his face, the streetlight casting a harsh glow. A gasp rippled through the room. Carla's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Sarah's face froze, her eyes wide, her mouth parting in a silent plea. James didn't speak. He didn't need to. The sequence played on, relentless. Bank statements flashed across the screen, highlighting transfers to David's shell company, Sarah's signature clear as day. An audio clip followed, her voice sharp and smug. "By the time he figures it out, I'll be long gone with half his assets. He's so gullible, he'd probably thank me on the way out." The room went silent, the jazz quartet faltering to a stop. Mia stood slowly, her hand over her mouth, whispering to her husband. David gripped his beer, his knuckles white, his eyes darting to the exit. Sarah tried to laugh, her voice trembling. "This isn't funny, James," she said, stepping toward him. "Turn it off. Now." But the screen shifted again, another audio. "He actually thinks those kids are his. David, and I say it all the time. He's the perfect fool." The words hung in the air, each one a blade. The final slide appeared, a PDF scan of the DNA results. Probability of paternity, 0%. For both Emma and Liam. The text loomed, unyielding, a verdict no one could ignore. Sarah stumbled back, her hand clutching a table for support. Her legs buckled, and she slid against the wall, her silver dress catching the light like a fallen star. "You're disgusting," she hissed, her voice breaking. "You ruined everything." James stepped closer, his voice low, calm, cutting.
No, Sarah.
"You ruined everything. I just stopped protecting your lies." David finally spoke, his voice shaky. "Man, this is out of line. We should take this private." James turned to him, his eyes cold. "Private? Like the account you opened with my money? Or the apartment you bought with my contracts?" The crowd murmured, heads turning to David, who shrank under their stares. Carla stood, her face tight. "I think we should go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Others followed, gathering coats, avoiding Sarah's gaze. The room emptied like a tide pulling back, leaving only silence in its wake. Mia lingered, her eyes on Sarah, who reached for Kanojonoode. "Mia, you believe me, right?" Sarah pleaded, her voice desperate. "He's exaggerating. He's twisting everything." Mia pulled her hand away, her expression a mix of pity and disgust. "I don't know who you are," she said, each word a quiet dagger. She turned to James, her nod heavy with respect. "I'm sorry," she whispered, then left, her husband trailing behind. The last guest slipped out, the door closing with a soft thud. Sarah stood alone in the center of the room, her dress crumpled, her face streaked with mascara. She turned to James, fury and desperation warring in her eyes. "You think this makes you strong?" she spat. "You humiliated me. You made a circus out of our lives." James stepped closer, his voice even unyielding.
No, Sarah.
"I ended the circus you created. I just made sure everyone saw the tent collapse." She reached for his arm, but he pulled away. "Don't," he said, his tone final. "This performance is over. You can stop acting now." Sarah's hands fell to her sides, her shoulders slumping. "Fine," she said, her voice barely audible. "You want a divorce? You'll pay for this. I'll take you for everything." James shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "Everything? The house you can't touch? The accounts you can't access? There's nothing left for you to take, Sarah. You've already taken enough." She stared at him, her jaw trembling, her phone buzzing ignored in her clutch. James walked to the table, pulled out a manila folder, and set it down. "Your copy of the divorce papers," he said. "Filed this morning. You'll be served officially tomorrow. But consider this an early birthday gift." She opened the folder, her hands shaking, her eyes scanning the pages. "You're serious?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. James nodded. "I've never been more serious in my life." He turned and walked toward the exit, the city lights stretching out beyond the windows. Sarah called after him, her voice cracking. "James, wait." He didn't stop. He pushed through the door, the cool night air hitting his face, and stepped into the Chicago night. The weight of 14 years lifted, replaced by something new. Not peace, not yet, but possibility. He'd torn down the lie. Now he'd build something real. If this moment hit you as hard as it hit us, smash that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from, and how did this twist make you feel? Your support keeps these stories alive, and we might just call your name in our next one. The morning after Sarah's birthday, the Oak Park house felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. James stood in the kitchen, the scent of stale coffee lingering in the air, the silence broken only by the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower. The dining table, once a place for family dinners and Emma's art projects, was bare except for a single manila folder. The divorce papers he'd left for Sarah. She'd taken them, along with a suitcase, and left before dawn. James hadn't slept, not out of grief but from the strange clarity that comes when a mask finally falls. He sipped his coffee, black and bitter, and stared out the window at the gray November sky. Chicago's chill was settling in, and with it, the next chapter of his fight. Emma and Liam were still at their grandmother's, a small mercy that gave James time to think. He'd have to tell them something soon, a version of the truth gentle enough for their young hearts. He rehearsed the words in his mind, each attempt softer than the last. "Mom and I need some time apart," he'd say, "but I'm still your dad, and that will never change." The words felt hollow, not because they were untrue, but because they couldn't capture the weight of what Sarah had done. He set the mug down and rubbed his temples. The kids deserved better than a broken story, and he'd make sure they got it. By mid-morning, a knock at the door shattered the quiet. James opened it to find a sheriff's deputy, his face neutral, holding an envelope. "James Carter?" the deputy asked. James nodded, his stomach tightening. The envelope contained the official divorce notice, but stapled to it was another document, a summons. Sarah had filed a counterclaim, accusing him of financial manipulation, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The words blurred on the page, each one a calculated jab. She was fighting back, and she wasn't fighting fair. James drove to his lawyer's office in Evanston, the summons burning a hole in his briefcase. Ellen, his attorney, scanned the documents with a frown. "She's hired Marcus Tate," she said, her voice clipped, "one of the best divorce sharks in Chicago. This isn't just a defense, it's an attack. She's trying to paint you as the villain, maybe even push for full custody of the kids." James's jaw tightened. Custody? After what she did? Ellen leaned forward, her eyes steady. "She's banking on sympathy. If she can spin this right, the court might listen. We need to move fast." That evening, James picked up Emma and Liam from their grandmother's house in Hyde Park. The kids ran to him, their hugs a fleeting anchor in the storm. "Where's Mom?" Liam asked, his voice small. James knelt, forcing a smile. "She's staying with a friend for a bit," he said. "But you're with me, okay? We're gonna have some fun this weekend." Emma studied him, her 10-year-old eyes too perceptive. "Are you and Mom fighting?" she asked. James hesitated, then ruffled her hair. "Grown-up stuff, kiddo. Nothing you need to worry about." But her frown lingered, a reminder that the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. The next day, Sarah's counterattack hit the airwaves. James was in his office reviewing contracts when his assistant rushed in. "You need to see this," she said, turning on the TV. A local Chicago news channel was airing a segment on Windy City Stories, a human interest show known for its emotional interviews. Sarah sat across from the host, her eyes red-rimmed, her voice trembling. "I was blindsided," she said, dabbing at a tear. "My husband humiliated me in front of everyone I love. He's controlling, manipulative, and now he's trying to take my children." The host nodded sympathetically, and the screen flashed a photo from the birthday party. James standing by the projector, his face unreadable. The caption read, "A marriage implodes in public." James's phone buzzed with notifications. Texts from friends, alerts from news apps, even a message from Mia. "She's lying through her teeth. I'm so sorry, James. Social media was worse." Hashtags like #ChicagoDivorceDrama trended, with strangers debating his motives. "Sounds like he snapped," one post read. "She must have pushed him too far," said another. The noise was suffocating, each comment a reminder of how easily a lie could spread. James turned off the TV, his hands shaking. He wasn't just fighting Sarah. He was fighting a narrative she'd crafted to bury him. That night, he sat Emma and Liam down in the living room, the glow of a single lamp casting soft shadows. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "Mom and I are having some problems, and we might not live together anymore. But I love you both, and I'm not going anywhere." Liam's eyes welled up. "Is it because of Uncle David?" he asked, his voice barely audible. James froze, the question cutting deeper than he'd expected. "Why do you say that?" he asked gently. Liam shrugged, clutching a stuffed dinosaur. "Mom talks to him a lot. I don't like him." Emma stayed silent, her arms crossed, but her eyes met James's, searching for something he couldn't give. "We'll be okay," he said, pulling them close. I promise. The legal battle escalated the next week. Sarah's lawyer, Marcus Tate, filed a motion for a restraining order, claiming James's public shaming posed a threat to her safety. The motion was flimsy, but it was enough to force a hearing at the Daily Center, Chicago's towering courthouse. James walked through the marble halls, the weight of the city's history pressing against him. Ellen met him outside the courtroom, her briefcase stuffed with evidence. "We've got something new," she said, handing him a folder. Inside were emails between Sarah and David, pulled from a server Ray had accessed. They discussed siphoning funds from James's company, with one chilling line from Sarah: "If we push him to bankruptcy, the insurance will cover us both." James's blood ran cold. This wasn't just betrayal, it was sabotage. In court, Tate painted Sarah as a victim, her tearful testimony echoing her TV interview. But Ellen was relentless, presenting the emails, bank records, and Ray's photos. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward as Ellen played an audio clip of Sarah's voice. "He's so gullible. He'd thank me on the way out." The courtroom fell silent, Tate's objections drowned out by the weight of the evidence. The restraining order was denied, and Sarah's counterclaim weakened, her credibility crumbling under the truth. As they left the courtroom, James caught Sarah's gaze, her eyes hollow, her defiance fading. She looked smaller, like a shadow of the woman he'd once loved. James drove home through Chicago's evening traffic, the city's lights blurred by a light rain. The victory was real, but it didn't feel like triumph. Sarah's lies had cost her everything: her friends, her family, her story. But they'd cost James too. He thought of Emma and Liam, their questions growing sharper each day. He thought of the house, once a home, now a battlefield. He pulled into the driveway, the porch light flickering as always. Inside, he found a note from Emma on the kitchen counter. "I love you, Dad." He held it, his eyes burning, and made a silent vow. He'd protect them no matter what came next. Sarah's TV stunt had backfired, the emails sealing her fate. But James knew she wouldn't stop. She was cornered, desperate, and desperation made people dangerous. He sat in his office that night, the burner phone buzzing with a new message from Ray. "Got something big. Check your email." James opened his laptop, his heart pounding. Whatever was coming, he'd face it. For Emma, for Liam, for the man he was becoming. The Chicago winter settled over Oak Park like a quiet promise, the air sharp with the bite of December. James sat in his office, the glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The house was still, Emma and Liam asleep upstairs, their soft snores a reminder of the life he was fighting to protect. His laptop sat closed, untouched since the latest email from Ray, the private investigator. The subject line had been simple: final delivery. James hadn't opened it yet. The weight of the past months, Sarah's betrayal, the DNA results, the courtroom battles, had left him cautious, as if each new truth might unravel the fragile piece he'd begun to build. But curiosity, or perhaps necessity, won out. He clicked. The email contained a single attachment, a scanned document labeled David's journal. A note from Ray explained, "Found this in Marshall's apartment. He sent it to you via courier from county lockup. Says it's the least he owes you." James's pulse quickened. David, now awaiting trial for fraud, had been a ghost since Sarah's birthday, his name a bitter echo in James's mind. He opened the file, the pages unfolding like a confession. David's handwriting was messy, the words raw, unfiltered. "I never meant for it to go this far," the first line read. But Sarah made it easy. She always knew how to pull the strings. James read on, his breath shallow. The journal detailed years of deception. How Sarah had pursued David. How their affair had grown from stolen moments to a calculated plan. But one passage stopped him cold. She was pregnant once, years ago. Said it was James's. She didn't want it. Said it'd tie her to him forever. She got rid of it before he ever knew. I told her it was her choice, but I saw the relief in her eyes after. She never looked back. James's hands trembled, the words blurring on the screen. A child. His child. Gone before he'd even had a chance to know it existed. The pain was sharp, a fresh wound layered over the scars of Sarah's lies. He stood, pacing the room, his reflection flickering in the dark window. The rage was there, familiar, urging him to act, to send the journal to the press, to Mia, to anyone who still doubted Sarah's cruelty. He could destroy her completely, strip away the last shreds of her story. But as he gripped the edge of his desk, another thought broke through. What would it cost him? Another round of headlines, more whispers in Oak Park, more questions from Emma and Liam. He thought of their faces, their trust in him, and the man he wanted to be for them. Revenge was a fire, but it burned everything in its path. James sank back into his chair, the journal still open on the screen. He read the passage again, slower this time, letting the pain settle. Sarah had taken so much, his trust, his family, a child he'd never know. But she couldn't take his choice now. He closed the laptop, the decision made. The journal would stay private, locked in a drawer, a truth he'd carry alone. Not for her, but for himself. For the man he was becoming, one who didn't need to destroy to heal. The next morning, James woke to a letter slipped under the front door, the handwriting unmistakably Sarah's. He opened it in the kitchen, the scent of brewing coffee grounding him. Her words were shaky, less polished than he remembered. "I've had time to think," she wrote. "I regret what I did. I miss our life. I'm pregnant, James, and it's yours. Maybe we can start over, even as friends." He stared at the page, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Pregnant. The lie was almost pathetic in its desperation. He thought back to a quiet decision he'd made a year ago, a vasectomy at a Chicago clinic, kept secret not out of distrust but exhaustion. He'd never told Sarah, never needed to. Now, her claim was just another thread in the web she'd spun, unraveling with every move. He folded the letter and placed it in a drawer with the journal, two relics of a life he'd outgrown. He didn't respond. Sarah wasn't reaching for redemption. She was grasping for control, and he had none left to give. The courts had already ruled in his favor, the assets locked, the custody hearing pending. Emma and Liam were his, not by blood but by every moment he'd spent loving them. Teaching Liam to ride a bike, holding Emma through asthma attacks, reading bedtime stories until his voice grew hoarse. Biology didn't build that. He did. That weekend, James took the kids to Lake Michigan, the shoreline dusted with frost. The water stretched endless and gray, the Chicago skyline a distant silhouette. Liam skipped stones, his laughter echoing, while Emma built a sandcastle, her scarf flapping in the wind. James watched them, his heart full despite the cracks. "Dad, look!" Liam called, holding up a smooth pebble. James grinned, kneeling beside him. "That's a keeper," he said, pocketing the stone. Emma joined them, her cheeks flushed. "Can we get hot chocolate after?" she asked. "Only if you say pretty please first," James teased, pulling her into a hug. Their laughter warmed him, a shield against the cold. Back home, they curled up on the couch for a movie night, a tradition James had revived. Emma picked The Incredibles and Liam insisted on extra popcorn. As the credits rolled, Emma leaned against James, her voice soft. "Are we gonna be okay, Dad?" she asked, echoing a question she'd asked weeks ago. James kissed her forehead, his voice steady. "We're more than okay," he said. "We're us." Liam snuggled closer, already half asleep, and James felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, not fully, but something close. A beginning. Weeks later, a second letter arrived, this time from a law firm. Sarah was requesting mediation, a last-ditch effort to salvage something. Custody, money, dignity. James declined with a single phone call, letting the courts handle the rest. He had no more words for her, no more energy to spare. Sarah had written her ending, and it wasn't his to rewrite. He learned through Ray that she'd left Chicago, her parents cutting her off, her friends silent. She was a ghost now, her story erased by the truth she'd tried to outrun. David's fate was colder, more final. A federal audit had unraveled his shell companies, leading to a conviction for fraud. He'd cut a deal testifying against smaller players, but it cost him everything. The last James heard, David was back in Ohio, living with his mother, banned from business in Illinois. Justice didn't shout. It arrived quietly, like snow covering a ruined house. James repainted the Oak Park house that spring, the walls fresh with soft blues and grays. He replaced the old photos with new ones. Emma at her piano recital, Liam with his first soccer trophy, the three of them at Lake Michigan, laughing under a rare sunny sky. The porch light finally worked, its glow steady. He started running again, the Chicago streets waking with him each dawn. Friends returned, dinners filled the house with laughter, and the kids' questions grew lighter, their trust in him unshaken. One evening, James sat on the porch, a blanket around his shoulders, sipping tea as the stars emerged. He thought about forgiveness not for Sarah, but for himself, for staying too long, for ignoring the cracks, for letting love blind him. He forgave that man because he'd learned. The man he was now knew the weight of truth, the strength of choice, the power of love that didn't need blood to bind. He looked at the house, the light spilling from Emma's window, and felt it, freedom. Not loud, not perfect, but real. The story didn't end with Sarah's fall or David's ruin. It ended here, in the quiet moments, in the life James built from the ashes. He wasn't a fool. He was a father, a survivor, a man who'd walked through fire and found his way to the other side. And that was enough.